Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again today for Grace with Paul Gray. I've been thinking and I've talked to you all a little bit about the way to end all the vitriol and the hatred and the animosity and the mass shootings and things like that. And no, it's not pie in the sky. God says it actually will happen one day. On that day, we will know that Christ is in us and we're in Christ. The whole Trinity is in us. And once we start letting Christ live as us, then all of those things will eventually stop. So, what does it mean for Christ to live as us? How do we not live by our own mind, will, and emotions, and instead have Christ live as us? Well, it involves setting aside, at least temporarily, our soul, which is our mind, will, and emotions, and listening only to our spirit, which is actually one with Christ. Paul wrote to the church in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 6:17, he said, "He who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with the Lord. In our union with him, we are one spirit with the Lord." See, as long as we're influenced by incorrect things in our mind, our will, and our emotions, I mean, our emotions can get fired up about something and we can be totally misinterpreting it. As long as we go with the incorrect things in our mind, Christ won't be living as us. Look at what Paul wrote to the church in Galatians 2:20 and 21. He said, "I've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me," or as me. "And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me." He said, "I don't nullify the grace of God, because if righteousness comes through the law, trying to get right with God by what we believe and think and do," he said, "Christ died needlessly." See, Paul got it. I didn't do this 100% of the time. No one will until we see Christ face to face. But Paul stopped, for the most part, living in his own mind, will, and emotions, and let Christ live as him. Our mind, will, and emotions are influenced by our five senses, of course. What we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. What we see in humanity, in ourselves and people around us, in the news. What other people say about history and the future. And many times, instead of living in the now, we worry about the past or in the future. And we do that in our mind. Many times the problem is in our minds. And very little of the things that we tend to think are true are actually from God. They're from the world. So we want to not be unaware. We want to be aware that we have an enemy, whatever you call that enemy, whatever form that you think it takes or has or is or whatever. There is an enemy. There is an enemy that does not want us to know the real, true God, does not want us to listen to the Spirit of Christ, certainly doesn't want Christ to live as us, but instead wants us to listen to the things that we have conceived in our own mind, will, and emotions. That enemy puts thoughts into our mind, and then if we believe them, and if we take them as truth, if we take them as to being things, well, we've figured that out, we understand that, this is truth, it has to be right, then those thoughts can actually become harmful enemies to us. See, our own mind wants to be in control. The Bible calls that sometimes the flesh, the old man, or the false self, or the ego, wants to be in control, wants to figure things out, wants to be the boss, wants to do what we think is right, influenced by things that we hear in the world. The old comic strip character Pogo had it right when he said, "We've met the enemy and it is us." Well, we're going to flesh that out some more as we go along this week. Thanks everybody for watching. Hope everything's going well with you. See you all next time.